The oil play nobody saw coming. What if I told you the next global power move isn't about nukes, isn't about troops, but oil, and not just any oil? We're talking about the largest oil reserves on Earth, sitting in a broken country, while Washington quietly sharpens its knives. And this time, the stakes are personal. For a White House obsessed with energy dominance, President Trump has his eyes locked on one prize: Venezuelan oil. Not diplomacy. Not democracy. Oil. On paper, it's bold, almost genius. If the U.S. gains effective control over Venezuela's oil exports, it could rewrite global power rules. Gas prices wouldn't scare Washington like before. Middle Eastern oil producers wouldn't be calling the shots. And rivals like China? They'd have to play by America's rules, or pay the price. Straight from the mouths of global power players, Russia's sovereign wealth fund chief Kirill Dmitriev says Washington could gain huge market leverage over oil. Meanwhile, in Beijing, alarm bells ring. Analysts warn that U.S. influence in Latin America could allow America to cut off oil and strategic resources to China at will. Let that sink in. Energy isn't just fuel anymore. It's a weapon. But here's where it gets dicey. Trump's big oil dream is smashing into reality like a freight train. American oil companies aren't exactly lining up to dive into Venezuela's chaos. Sanctions, mismanagement, rusted infrastructure, broken refineries. It's a minefield. Exxon, Chevron, these guys don't move unless the math adds up.
And right now?
The math looks ugly. Yet Washington's focus hasn't wavered. Trump's obsession with oil goes back decades to the 1970s oil embargo, which he called devastating in the art of the deal. That fear never left him. Fast forward to today, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves on the planet, but produces barely 1% of the world's supply. Trump claims billions will rebuild it, but analysts say that takes years, not months. And here's another kicker. The world is already drowning in oil. Prices are weak, and flooding the market with more could backfire hard. So the question isn't just about energy security, it's about control. Because once oil turns into a geopolitical choke point, things escalate fast. And while America produces more oil than ever, global rivals are watching every move. Allies aren't blind. Competitors aren't idle. Every misstep could be exploited. Here's the thing, Americans. This story isn't academic. It's personal. Energy shocks can ripple across shipping, groceries, travel, and even the cost of living. And when global power players start maneuvering quietly, the first effects you notice are in your wallet. Now here's where the suspense kicks in. Washington's oil chessboard is in play, but the pieces aren't moving the way anyone expects. And what happens next? It won't be subtle. Something big is coming. And when it lands, no one will be fully ready. When oil stops being protection and starts being a trap. Here's the part nobody in Washington wants to admit out loud. Oil dominance only works if everyone else plays along. And history? It shows they usually don't. Once you start using energy as leverage, you're no longer just managing markets, you're poking a bear. And bears? They rarely stay calm. Trump's fixation on Venezuelan oil isn't happening in a vacuum. The global oil system is already fragile, oversupplied, and politically tense. Analysts quietly warn that the world isn't facing a shortage problem, it's a control problem. And here's where things turn risky. On paper, controlling Venezuelan exports could weaken OPEC and limit the power of governments and cartels that like to manipulate prices behind closed doors. Sounds like a win, right? Yeah, not so fast. Oil producers don't just sit there and take it. Saudi Arabia needs higher prices to balance its budget. Push markets too far, and Riyadh might not keep gas cheap at home. Americans feel it first. Then there's Iran. Tensions in the Middle East are simmering, and oil suddenly matters again in ways most Americans haven't had to think about. Past presidents worried that a spark in the Gulf would send oil prices sky high.
Trump?
Not so much. U.S. production is strong, the economy less dependent, but that confidence cuts both ways. Risk grows when leaders feel insulated from consequences. China is watching closely. Only 5% of its crude imports come from Venezuela, but that backup plan matters if Beijing loses Iranian oil. Venezuelan crude isn't just fuel, It's leverage. And if that leverage falls under U.S. influence, that's not a trade issue. That's a strategic threat. And here's the kicker. Trump openly clashed with major U.S. oil companies, even suggesting Exxon might stay out of Venezuela. That's a warning signal. When a president publicly challenges your own energy giants, it signals bigger risks. Control is slipping. Markets hate uncertainty. Allies dislike unpredictability. Rivals? They see opportunity. And while Washington focuses on barrels, the real game is happening in clean energy, electricity systems, advanced batteries, and tech innovation. China is miles ahead. So here's the dangerous trade-off. Chasing old-school oil leverage might cost America its future dominance. Yes, Venezuela and Iranian oil hold power, but the cost? Economic backlash, strategic retaliation, a world less stable, not more. And Americans should pay attention. Even if the moves seem contained, ripple effects hit home. Gas spikes, shipping costs, groceries, travel. Every disruption abroad lands at your doorstep sooner than you think. Here's the hard truth. Oil as a weapon isn't straightforward. Every move invites a response. And often, that response doesn't come where you expect. It's quiet at first, almost invisible, until suddenly, you're paying for the mistakes. And just when you think you've wrapped your head around it, think again. Venezuela may not be the end of the story. It's likely the test run. The next move in this high-stakes game? It's coming. And when it lands, it won't knock first. When leverage turns into blowback, here's what history teaches. Every time a superpower thinks it's immune to consequences, that's exactly when the consequences hit, and they don't knock first. Because once you start testing how much pressure the world can handle, you don't get to choose where the pushback comes from. And Venezuela? It's not just a crisis anymore, it's a pressure point, and every move Washington makes risks setting off a chain reaction. If the U.S. tightens its grip on Venezuelan oil, don't expect a headline tomorrow saying, "Retaliation arrives." No tanks in the streets. Instead, it shows up quietly, through market shifts, redirected alliances, supply decisions that seem disconnected, until suddenly, it's too late. That's blowback. That's how pressure comes back to bite you when you're not looking. China doesn't have to cut off trade overnight. It can lean on allies, slow-roll cooperation, redirect investments, and let pressure build in ways Washington won't see until the effects hit hard. Russia doesn't need threats. It coordinates production to tighten supply at the worst possible moment. That's how escalation stays deniable. That's how retaliation hides in plain sight. And then there's Venezuela itself. Years of sanctions and mismanagement have hollowed out the country, but chaos doesn't mean passivity. Power vacuums attract players, foreign intelligence, regional militias, black market operators. When oil is the prize, instability becomes the battlefield. And guess what? Every misstep abroad eventually lands at home. Energy shocks travel through shipping, groceries, airlines, and manufacturing. Americans may not feel it immediately, but when it hits everywhere at once. That's the invisible cost of power games. Here's the mistake superpowers make. They assume control equals stability, leverage equals safety. Trump's belief that America can push harder without triggering chaos relies on one big assumption, that rivals will just absorb pressure. History screams otherwise. From oil embargoes to trade wars, pressure almost always produces counterpressure. And once multiple points activate, Venezuela, Iran, China, the Gulf, the system stops acting predictably. Small moves spiral. Leaders make choices under pressure that look safe at first until the consequences pile up. That's when mistakes snowball. That's when leverage becomes a trap. And here's the part that should worry Americans. Oil dominance doesn't fail all at once. It fails quietly, then suddenly. Market distortions first. Diplomatic strain next. Public confusion. Why are prices rising? Why are alliances fraying? Then reactive decisions under pressure. By the time it's obvious, the damage is already done. Venezuela? It's just the opening board. If this strategy moves forward, there's little reason to think it stops there. Other oil-rich regions start looking tempting. Other pressure points emerge. And when the world sees a pattern in US moves, they start preparing their answer. An answer that won't come with a warning. And here's the kicker for Americans like you. The first effects may feel small, higher gas, pricier shipping, minor economic shocks, but the ripple grows fast. That's why paying attention now isn't optional. Every quiet move in Caracas could land at your doorstep weeks or months later. So buckle up. This isn't a slow news story. It's a ticking system, and Washington is the one testing its limits. The question isn't if blowback comes, it's how big it'll hit and how fast. And the next move? It's already in motion, you just haven't seen it yet. The endgame, leverage, chaos, and what comes next? Here's the part that hits closest to home. All the chess moves, all the quiet manipulations, all the energy dominance strategies, they eventually converge. And when they do, Americans feel it first. Because controlling Venezuelan oil isn't just about markets. It's about leverage, influence, pressure that can shift alliances, disrupt economies, and force reactions nobody wants, but everyone expects. Trump's plan, seizing influence over Venezuelan production, has a terrifying logic. On paper, it looks like 5D chess. Weaken OPEC, isolate rivals, reshape the global oil landscape. But on the board, every move carries risk. This isn't monopoly. Every misstep has real consequences. Let's break it down. First, Venezuela. The country is fractured. Infrastructure is crumbling. Power vacuums exist everywhere. American involvement, even controlled, creates opportunities for chaos. Militias, rogue operators, foreign powers, they all exploit gaps. What seems like leverage can instantly become liability. Second, the ripple effects. Oil markets aren't isolated. Prices, shipping, groceries, airlines, and manufacturing, they're all connected. A shock abroad slams American households before the government even notices. Most people shrug, thinking it's far away until it hits their wallet. And that's when Americans start asking, why didn't anyone see this coming? Third, global rivals. China, Russia, and Gulf producers aren't idle. If they feel threatened, they adapt. Redirect resources. Lock in supplies. Quietly build contingencies that leave the U.S. exposed. What looks like power can quickly turn into overreach. Here's the kicker Americans need to hear. While Washington obsesses over barrels, the real game is happening elsewhere. Electricity, batteries, clean tech, innovation is the next frontier. Beijing is quietly locking down the future. Ignore that, and today's leverage becomes tomorrow's vulnerability. Now, escalation. History proves, when energy is weaponized, conflict rarely starts with headlines. It begins quietly in markets, diplomacy, small decisions that spiral. Countries respond unpredictably. Pressure becomes a trap. Leverage becomes a liability. That's how wars or economic crises start without a single shot being fired. And for Americans, this isn't abstract. Every spike in gas prices, every supply disruption, every tension-filled negotiation abroad eventually lands at your doorstep. That's the invisible cost of global dominance. So, what's the takeaway? Venezuela may offer trillions in oil wealth on paper, but controlling it is a gamble, a slow burn of geopolitical pressure that can explode unexpectedly. Every advantage has a counter. Every move invites a response, and every misstep has consequences that reach home. And the most chilling part? If this strategy works, it won't stop there. Other oil-rich regions look tempting. Other pressure points emerge. The world will watch closely and prepare its own answers. Answers that won't come with warning. Because in this game, leverage isn't insurance, it's a weapon. And weapons always demand a reaction. So ask yourself, when the next global tremor hits oil markets, when prices spike, when alliances shift, when chaos lands at your doorstep, will it feel like a surprise? Or like something we've been hurtling toward all along? The next move is coming. And when it lands, nobody will be fully ready.